Hi guys, this is your junior philosophy and social science teacher. Maraming nag-request sa akin to make an analysis and interpretation about the speech of Corazon Aquino before the US Congress. And so, for today's video, we are going to revisit and examine this document and try to analyze the content, the context, and the perspective of Corazon Aquino in making this speech before the US Congress. Tara, samahan niyo ako. The speech was delivered by Corazon Aquino on September 18, 1986. That was 7 months after Corazon Aquino became the president. That was after the EDSA People Power Revolution. So when Marcos was ousted, and here comes Corazon Aquino assuming the presidency, she went to the United States and the US Congress and delivered this particular speech before the US people. Before we go to the document itself, let us first visit the background of Corazon Aquino and try to understand the context of this speech in relation to her background. Second, the event that happened in 1986, that was the People Power Revolution or the EDSA People Power Revolution. These are important matters for us to deeply understand the meaning of this speech given by Corazon Aquino before the US Congress. Hindi naman siguro lingid sa ating kaalaman that Corazon or Cory Aquino was the widowed wife of the late former Senator Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. Ninoy Aquino or Benigno Ninoy Aquino was one of the strongest opposition of the late President Ferdinand Marcos. And so when Ninoy Aquino was assassinated, Corazon Aquino was portrayed in history as the mourning wife, the widowed wife who was mourning for the death of her husband. And she was portrayed in history as the wife who had always been a shadow of her husband and relatives. And particularly, Corazon Aquino had no experience with politics. He had no experience with politics, unlike former Senator Benigno Ninoy Aquino. So it was really Ninoy Aquino who was well experienced about politics, but Corazon Aquino was not really experienced with politics. One important thing that we have to note about Corazon Aquino was that Corazon Aquino came from a wealthy family, coming from the Cuangco family who owns the Hacienda Luisita. They owned a vast portion of land in Tarlac and sugar plantation, and their relatives occupy local and national government positions during their time. Kaya nga, kung ikukumpara talaga natin between Corazon Aquino and Marcos or President Ferdinand Marcos, was that really Marcos was well experienced and well-rounded about politics, while Corazon Aquino was not. It was Benigno or Ninoy Aquino who was well-rounded also about politics. However, Ninoy Aquino was assassinated. And so, here comes the cry of the people. The cry of the people na dapat labanan yung dictatorship ni Marcos. Yun yung isa sa mga advokasya ni Corazon Aquino. That's why during the snap election, Corazon Aquino ran for president against Marcos. And so there was a snap election that happened in February 1986, and it resulted with a landslide win of President Marcos. So Corazon Aquino lost in that election, although they were claiming that meron daw dayaan na nangyari, but we do not really know what happened. After that snap election, there were a lot of protests that happened, coming from different people such as the CPP-NPA, the rebels, and some of the activists were actually working out and having this plot to make a revolution. Until such time that the Archbishop of Manila, which was the Jaime Cardinal Sin, urged the people to come to the EDSA to have that People Power Revolution. Kaya nga, sa EDSA People Power Revolution in 1986, malaki yung contribution ng Catholic Church in realizing that particular EDSA People Power Revolution, because it was Cardinal Sin who actually talked and urged the people, especially the Catholics, the nuns, mga madre, mga pare, mga seminarista, to come to EDSA and march in order to have that People Power Revolution, aiming to oust Ferdinand Marcos from the presidency. So, yun yung nangyari. Marcos left the Malacanang Palace and fled to Hawaii. And here comes Corazon Aquino assuming the presidency. And so, on September 18, 1986, that was 7 months after Cory became the president, she went to the US to deliver this particular speech. Let us now visit this speech. In the speech, Corazon Aquino actually emphasized the character and the conviction of her late husband, that was Ninoy Aquino. And she was talking about the strong opposition of Ninoy Aquino about the authoritarianism of that Marcos. And she talked about three times, almost, they have lost Ninoy Aquino, and all of those sufferings that Ninoy Aquino had experienced in the hands of the authoritarianism of Marcos. She said in a speech, "The government sought to break him by indignities and terror. They locked him up in a tiny, nearly airless cell in a military camp in the north. They stripped him naked and held a threat of a sudden midnight execution over his head. Ninoy held up manfully under all of it. I barely did as well. For 43 days, the authorities would not tell me what had happened to him. This was the first time my children and I felt we had lost him." Another content of the speech was that Cory was talking about the death of her husband. She said, "And then we lost him irrevocably and more painfully than in the past. The news came to us in Boston. It had to be after the 3 happiest years of our lives together. But his death was my country's resurrection and the courage and faith by which alone they could be free again. The dictator had called him a nobody, yet 2 million people threw aside their passivity and fear and escorted him to his grave." Based on the speech itself, we can see that Cory attributed the peaceful EDSA revolution to the death of her husband. So para bang sinasabi niya na if not because of the death of Ninoy Aquino, then posibleng walang EDSA revolution na mangyari. Kasi after the death of Ninoy, ang daming sumampatya sa kanila. There were many people who sided with them. There were, sabi nila, who were also claiming for freedom, for rights against sa dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos. In the speech also, we could see that Cory introduced the democratic philosophy, that she claimed as coming also from her husband. She said, "I held fast to Ninoy's conviction that it must be the ways of democracy. I held out for participation in the 1984 election the dictatorship called, even if I know it would be rigged. I was warned by the lawyers of the opposition that I ran the grave risks of legitimizing the foregone results of elections that were clearly going to be fraudulent. But I was not fighting for lawyers, but for the people in whose intelligence I had implicit faith. By the exercise of democracy, even in dictatorship, they would be prepared for democracy when it came. And then also, it was the only way I knew by which we could measure our power even in the terms dictated by the dictatorship. The people vindicated me in an election shamefully marked by government thuggery and fraud. The opposition swept the elections, garnering a clear majority of the votes even if they ended up, thanks to a corrupt commission on elections, with barely a third of the seats in parliament. Now I knew our power." Base sa ating binabasa, pinapalabas ni former President Corazon Aquino that the result of the snap election between her and Marcos was a fraud. Isang malaking dayaan na nangyari. And that her presidency was through the people's struggle. Kaya parang she was making the people's struggle as the legitimate means for her to become the president, and not because of that particular election. So, what really made her as a president was she was not elected. She assumed presidency because of that it's a people power revolution. Kaya nga, may ibang tanong din yung sa side ng mga Marcos, bakit daw in really did not become or did not assume the presidency? Bakit Fidel Ramos did not assume the presidency? Why Corazon Aquino? That was the question. And itong katotohanan about this proclamation of former President Cory Aquino, totoo ba talaga na dayaan yung nangyari during that snap election? So, was it really a fraud? We don't know. You don't know. I don't know. Kasi wala tayong ebidensya. Mahirap gumawa ng accusations na wala naman tayong ebidensya. Isa sa mga major content ng speech ni Corazon Aquino was really about the restoration of democracy. He was talking about the respect of freedom, rights of the people, and the restoration of democracy from the authoritarianism of Ferdinand Marcos. Isa sa controversial na agenda of this speech, of Cory Aquino's speech before the US Congress, was about peace, the peace agenda, because he was talking about the existing communist insurgency in the country. We can actually remember that during the time of Marcos, one of the reasons why Marcos declared martial law was due to the uprisings, the growing numbers of the CPP-NPA during his time. So, when Marcos implemented the martial law, ang daming mga CPP-NPA na nakulong. In fact, some of them were tortured based on some historians. However, based on the speech in itself of Corazon Aquino, she wanted to have peace. She wanted to have peace with these people. That's why this is one of the reasons why ang daming mga NPAs, ang daming mga CPP-NPA ang pinakawalan ni President Corazon Aquino during her time, because she wanted that these people will live a normal life, not living a life in the jungle. Sabi niya, these people should leave the armed struggle rather, and go back to the city life and live with us peacefully. So she wanted to have peace. Isa yan si modelan kung bakit during the time of President Corazon Aquino, ang daming mga rebelde na captured by Marcos were actually released from prison. However, this is now the question. After the time of Corazon Aquino, did the CPP-NPA stop the rebellion? Bakit? Nandun pa rin ang rebellion. Nandun pa rin yung MNLF, yung MILF. In fact, the CPP-NPA actually increased in numbers from that time. So, what was the reason? That's why I will make a video also about CPP-NPA. I will discuss about communism and the ideology of these rebels in the other videos. Towards the end of that speech, Corazon Aquino was actually thanking the America. She thanked the America for accommodating them for 3 years when they were in exile. She was assuring the America that she wanted to restore democracy. She was assuring the America that there should be alliance with the Philippines and the America during her reign as the President of the Philippines. We are going to analyze, even towards the end of that speech, Corazon Aquino was still continuously building alliance with the America, continuously building connections with the American people, the same as during the time of Marcos. So the same pa rin nangyari. But what is important here is that in that speech, we can already take some clues, not just on the individual conviction and ideas and aspirations of Corazon Aquino and Ninoy Aquino, but also some guiding principles and framework of what kind of government she wanted to build, what kind of government she wanted to represent while she became the President of the Philippines right after the time of President Marcos. This is Sir June, and thank you for watching this video.